Hi, everyone, and welcome to season 5 of the Fat Doctor podcast. That's right, it's 2025, the 8th of January, I believe, when this episode is released. And it's time. It's time to shake things up a little, do things a little bit differently. And by differently, I mean not all that differently, because let's face it, it's probably going to be a lot of me rambling on, and you trying to follow along. But I'm going to try and mix it up a little bit. I've got a little segment coming up today. It's called Everything You've Been Told About Weight Loss is a Lie. It's a bit of a mouthful, but I like it. It's just very simple, very direct and to the point. I'm also going to give you the opportunity to ask me questions, any question you like, and I will try and answer them on my podcast. So if you're a long time listener, now's your opportunity to ask me anything. Obviously, no one's asked me a question yet, so I can't answer them today, but hopefully from next week. And I have tried to prepare today, which I'm very proud of. I have a masterclass coming up on prediabetes, and because of that, I've done a lot of research into prediabetes, and I am full of wisdom and evidence and facts and figures that I just have to share with you. So I'm gonna. And so that's what today's going to be all about. It's all going to be about prediabetes. I'm going to tell you all about Joy. Joy is a wonderful woman who I kind of made up. And you're going to be meeting a lot of people that I've made up over the next year during season 5 of this podcast. I started doing it last year in season 4, and I really enjoyed it, just making up people, because of course I can't share real stories of real clients. That would be completely and utterly unethical, and dangerous and against the law. So I won't be doing that. But I'm creating fictional characters who have similarities with some of the people that I meet and have met over the last few years and in my entire career. And of course, I'm changing names and dates and places, and there's nothing about these fictional characters that relate to any one individual. But I don't know. I like creating them. Maybe it's appealing to the creative side of me. And I think a lot of you have said to me, I found this really helpful because I was able to relate to that person. And so I'm going to keep doing it. And today I'm going to tell you about Joy. Joy is here with us in my podcast, but she's also in my emails, and she's not in my blog post actually. I didn't talk about Joy in my blog post, but she is on my website. So if you want to know more about Joy, I will link all the things I've written about her in the show notes. And if you're watching this on YouTube, in the comment section below. So yeah, let me tell you about Joy. Let's start off with her story, shall we? She is a 39-year-old full-time parent of 2. I say full-time parent, sorry. She has a full-time job and she's a parent of 2 children, aged 5 and 7. And so life has always revolved around family. She, as the mother of 2 young kids, her days are filled with the usual school runs and play dates and homework help and that constant juggling act that comes with raising children and managing the household and going to work, etc., etc. So, as much as she loves her kids, her family, her home, and even her job, she often feels like she's running on empty, and she's trying to keep up with everything and everyone. So, somewhere along the way, over the last few years, maybe the last couple of decades, if we're honest, her own health got pushed very much to the back burner. Who can relate? Who here can relate? I've got my hand up to Joy's story. I wish I was 39. No, I don't. I'm happy being 44, but 39 is half a decade ago for me now. Anyway, moving on. Years ago, during her last pregnancy, and I'm not going to lie, this is actually based on my story a little bit, but not just my story. It's based on lots of people's story, very similar. Years ago, during her last pregnancy, Joy was diagnosed with gestational diabetes. And though it was a challenging time, she took the necessary steps to manage her condition, and after childbirth, her blood sugar levels returned to normal. That being said, the experience left her with a real lingering fear that her body was somehow predisposed to diabetes. And so the annual blood test that she had to have in the coming years became a real source of anxiety for her. Oh my gosh, this is literally my story. I was like, oh, it's loosely based on me. This is me. I think because I called her Joy and made her, Femme, gave her she, her pronouns. I somehow thought that I could pretend it wasn't me, but it is. Um, anyway, Joy felt she had no choice but to follow her doctor's orders, right? Even though she had no real understanding of what these numbers meant and why they applied to her overall health, she was told blood test every year, and so she did it. Now, during her recent annual visit, her doctor reviewed her blood work and told her that her HbA1c was 6.1%. I don't know what that is in the other units. I'm going to guess it's something like 44, but I couldn't say for sure. For those who aren't familiar, there are two different units that are used for HbA1c, for fasting blood glucose, for most blood tests around the world. And so they'll differ from place to place. So if you look at the WHO and then you look at the CDC in the US and you look at European, everybody's going to be using a slightly different units, measures, not just numbers that are normal and not normal. I'm talking about actual different units. So sometimes I have to do a bit of translating in my head. I didn't on this occasion, clearly wasn't as prepared as I ought to have been. Anyway, it was 6.1%, and her doctor spoke very quickly without any empathy. No explanation as to the meaning of the number, only that it indicated she had prediabetes. That was the word, prediabetes. And then he goes on to lecture her for nearly 20 minutes about how dangerous this condition is and how all the risks to her and how basically Joy's body was now officially the enemy, blamed for a disease that she didn't even understand because there was no explanation, just to kind of, yeah, you're probably going to end up with diabetes. So it's not diabetes. No, it's not diabetes, but you might end up with diabetes. That was essentially the conversation. So clearly the doctor was more focused on her weight than her health. And he went on to say that the reason Joy's blood sugar was elevated was because she was, and I'm going to say the word now, prepared for it, content warning. I'm going to use some very foul language. You ready? The reason your blood sugar is elevated is because you're obese. And that word just hangs in the air like an accusation, like a shot. She was told to lose weight to avoid the inevitable progression to full-blown diabetes. So this isn't full-blown, this is just pre, but if you don't lose weight, that's it. So without even giving her a chance to get her bearings, let alone ask any questions or explain anything, her doctor went on to suggest possible interventions, Ozempic or weight loss surgery. Neither of which she felt fully comfortable with in the first place. And when she didn't agree to them straight away, her doctor really just all of a sudden began to lose interest and became increasingly impatient with her. So in the end, she agreed to think about it. I'll think about it. And she left with a promise to get in touch once she had decided. Because really, once she said no to Ozempic or weight loss surgery, the doctor was no longer interested. That was Joy's experience. She left that surgery, that consultation, hoping she would never have to see that doctor again. She'd been hoping for a conversation about how to improve her health. She knew that something was wrong with her blood tests, but she was not looking for a lecture on how she had basically failed. She had zero idea about how to start tackling the issue because all she'd been told was that weight loss was the solution, and that was not something that she was particularly interested in doing again because it never worked for her in the past, and because she had some idea that actually this focus on weight isn't the answer. Maybe she paid attention to a couple of my posts or listened to a couple of my podcasts. I don't know, maybe, possibly. I'm just saying. Anyway, the overwhelming focus on weight, and that combined with the fact that her doctor hadn't actually bothered to explain the root cause of her condition, just blaming her weight, she just left feeling completely defeated. Tears were shed. And she spent days afterwards replaying the consultation over and over again in her mind. Because the underlying message was so clear. It's your fault, Joy. It's your fault. And so the guilt just really weighed heavily on her. And let's not forget, she's already stretched thin from managing her family and daily life and work. And now she had to contend with the idea that her body was essentially betraying her. And she felt like a failure. As though, basically her size, her shape, something that was just natural and she could do very little about, was something to be ashamed of and something that was going to cause mass destruction. In the weeks following her appointment, Joy spent countless hours researching diabetes, pre-diabetes, weight loss, how to manage her health, etc., etc. And the more she learned, the more confused she became, because it seemed like every solution just led to more questions, and she was frustrated with the weight centric focus of the advice she received. She couldn't find anything that didn't focus on weight. So she just wasn't sure who to believe anymore. She'd read that weight cycling was a problem, and that probably dieting wasn't the best solution. But at the same time, everywhere she turned, every reputable organization, every decent website she could find online said the same thing as her GP: lose some weight, that's your only option. So she just wasn't sure what to believe. And she just felt broken, and she kept thinking to herself, I've always been an active person. I try to eat healthy. And I move a lot and I exercise. But that hasn't helped me so far. What's the point? That kind of thing. Again, who can relate? So we get to a point where Joy finds herself questioning everything she's been told. Is weight loss really the key to avoiding diabetes? Does she need to put herself through another round of dieting? Or this time try Ozempic? Or go the whole way and go for a weight loss surgery? Or is there possibly a better way? Um, she's heard about the harm of weight cycling, but it seems to contradict everything that her doctor has recommended. So what does she do? She's trapped in this cycle of guilt and shame and uncertainty. And every time she thinks she's getting a handle on things, another piece of conflicting advice comes along and makes her doubt herself all over again. Poor Joy. Um, she needs to come. Well, first of all, she needs to read my blog. Forget anything else. She needs to read my blog because I have a lot to say about this. I really do. I have a lot to say about prediabetes. So I've got a blog post that says Prediabetes, a lesson in PR. And I think I wrote this quite a long time ago because I was looking through it and I was like, ooh, I don't remember writing that. Let me break it down for you. Because some of you don't like reading blogs, some of you like listening to podcasts. So let me break it down for you. Prediabetes is, according to the people who, write stuff, like, for example, Diabetes UK, prediabetes basically means that your blood sugars are higher than quote unquote normal, but not high enough for you to be diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Which is odd because if it's not high enough to be diabetes, why is it not normal? Like, I mean, it's, I think about other medical conditions out there, like high blood pressure. There's a limit, right? There's a limit. Anything over 140 millimeters of mercury systolic, anything over 90 millimeters of mercury systolic, is high blood pressure, hypertension. That's the cutoff, and anything less is not high blood pressure. Normal blood pressure, if you will. Now, is there a target blood pressure? Yeah, 120 over 80. That's supposed to be the perfect blood pressure. That's where we're heading for. But if you have a blood pressure of 133 over 87, I'm not going to diagnose you with anything. I'm just going to be like, your blood pressure is 133 over 87. And if it gets to 140 or 90, then I will be diagnosing you with high blood pressure. Now, to be fair, depends on where you live, and it depends on whether your blood pressure was taken in the doctor's office or whether it was taken at home, and it depends on if you have any other medical conditions as well. So it might actually not be 140 over 90. That's a very that's a very generalized thing. If you're not sure whether or not you have high blood pressure and you want to know more about that, I have another masterclass on high blood pressure. But without getting too confusing, prediabetes is a weird thing. High blood pressure, high cholesterol. I'm trying to think what else. Just any thyroid. If your thyroid level gets too low, then it's low thyroid, hypothyroidism. But if your thyroid level is kind of like edging towards too low, but is not too low, then it's just nothing, right? That's all it is. It's nothing. So this pre-diabetes, it's a very odd thing. It just means that your blood sugars are higher than usual, normal, or whatever you want to call it. But should we be using the words normal? Should we be using the words ideal? Everybody's a little bit different. Like, why are we so obsessed with the fact that it's pre-diabetes? And is it really pre? That's the thing we want to ask ourselves. So basically how we measure it is we know what a normal blood glucose is, we know what diabetes is, and there's a bit in the middle, and we go that is pre-diabetes, and it's sometimes referred to as impaired fasting glucose. In other words, when you haven't eaten for 12 hours and you have a blood sugar test, your blood sugar should be below. Now I have to do calculations as well. Should be below 100, which milligrams per deciliter, which is 5.6 millimoles per liter. That's what it should be. So if it's higher than that, but not high enough to be considered diabetes, which is 125 or 6.9 millimoles per liter, then it's that little bit in between. There's also impaired glucose tolerance. This is for people who do a glucose tolerance test. What that means is you starve, then you have a fasting glucose, then you have a drink of 75 grams of glucose, and then you have a blood test 2 hours later. And that should be anything between 140 to 199 milligrams per deciliter, or 7.8 to 11 millimoles. And if it's more than that, it's diabetes. If it's less than 140, it's quote unquote normal. And if it's in between, it's impaired glucose tolerance. You could also have an HbA1c done. And HbA1c looks at your blood sugar over the course of 3 months. It is less accurate. And the reason it is less accurate is because blood sugars do go up and they do go down. And so if you're looking at something over the course of 3 months, there's a good chance that, it could have gone up and then gone back down again and you're fine. So yes, HbA1c is absolutely used, but ideally we'd want an impaired fasting glucose or an impaired glucose tolerance to support a diagnosis. Now, I mentioned about HbA1c, and so I should make it very clear the way I like to talk about it is diabetes, type 2 diabetes, is defined as sustained levels of high blood sugar or hyperglycemia. And it's that word sustained that is really important. Your blood sugar is going to go up and down all the time. Every day it's going up and down. And also, if you get sick, if you're particularly stressed, if you're not getting enough sleep, if you've been unwell, if you've just had surgery, there are a number of reasons why your blood sugar may go up intermittently, not permanently, not sustained, temporarily. That is not diabetes. So there's intermittent hyperglycemia, intermittent high glucose, and sustained high glucose. Sustained high glucose is type 2 diabetes. Intermittent high glucose is what I would consider to be normal. The WHO would say it is impaired fasting glucose. The American Diabetes Association, on the other hand, has something else to say about it. And let me tell you for why. Let me tell you about the history. In 1997, the American Diabetes Association came along and introduced the term impaired fasting glucose. So before that, as I said, there was normal and then there was diabetes. There was no in between. In 97, the American Diabetes Association said, no, there's something in between. There's a something in between, guys. And we're going to call it impaired fasting glucose. And the WHO said, sounds good, we'll do the same. And then the rest of the world adopted this term, impaired fasting glucose. That was 97. And then in 2001, the American Diabetes Association went, you know what, impaired fasting glucose isn't going to cut it. Nobody actually gives a shit because it just sounds too technical. We need something more eye-catching, more engaging. And according to an article, which I'm going to link in the show notes from Science Magazine in 2019, a fantastic read. I thoroughly recommend it. I'm going to quote from it. Prediabetes was born a public relations catchphrase. In 2001, the PR chief of the American Diabetes Association approached Dr. Richard Kahn, then the group's chief scientific and medical officer, for help with a vexing problem, Kahn recalls. The ADA needed a pitch to persuade complacent doctors and the public to take seriously a slight elevation in blood glucose, which might signal a heightened risk of type 2 diabetes. That's where it started. Let me just point things out here. It was the PR chief of the ADA. It was a vexing problem because doctors were becoming too complacent and the general public were not taking it seriously enough. Why? Because a slight elevation in blood glucose might signal a heightened risk of type 2 diabetes. And so, you know, basically the ADA just went from there. They replaced impaired fasting glucose with the term prediabetes, and the international community went, well, I'm not sure about that. Hang on. Impaired fasting glucose we'll stick with, but prediabetes is a bit misleading, right? Because you're implying they're going to get diabetes, and what proof do you have that that's the case? Now, the CDC, the Center for Disease Control in the United States of America, is very much led by the American Diabetes Association when it comes to anything diabetes related. So they went along with the ADA. And when the ADA said that impaired glucose tolerance or impaired fasting glucose significantly increased a person's risk of developing diabetes, and if you treated it early, then you would reduce the number of people who went on to develop diabetes. The CDC went, right, we believe them. We don't really need to see any proof of this. In fact, we'll disregard any of the proof that we've seen so far, and we're going to support them. The international community, on the other hand, went, well, we're not sure. We're not sure. In fact, they had a conference, I believe it was in 2009, and all sorts of kind of groups came along and decided that they were not going to accept the term prediabetes. They were not going to take it on, and they have never have. Nobody ever has. Only in the United States of America, and so in spite of this, not only did the ADA and the CDC stick to their guns, in spite of international pressure, they actually doubled down and reduced the level of which was considered prediabetes. So it used to be above 6.6%. So back in 1997, it was 6%. And they dropped it to 5.7% because they could. And this is incredible because it's, all of a sudden people just minding their own business. One day they're fine, the next day they've got prediabetes just because they changed they moved the goalposts again, they shifted the goalposts. They were saying, the CDC at the time, up to 30% of untreated prediabetes will progress to diabetes within 5 years. That's what they were saying. Of course, it turns out that's bullshit. According to their numbers, I believe it's less than 10% over 5 years, not 30%. And the statistics show it's anywhere between 2 and 5% of people with pre-diabetes will go on to develop diabetes in any 1 year. So there's nothing pre about it, right? 95% of people who have a pre-diabetes diagnosis won't develop diabetes that year. In fact, I think it's about 15%, between 15 and 30%, depends on who you look and where you get the information from. But within 10 years, within an entire decade, the vast majority of people with prediabetes will not have a diabetes diagnosis. Up to 85% of them will not have progressed on to type 2 diabetes. So it's not pre, is it? There's nothing pre about it. And that's what several studies have shown since then, including the Cochrane review, which was very, very clear. In 2018, the Cochrane Library in London decided to commission a review on whether or not raised blood sugar, prediabetes, increases the risk of developing type 2 diabetes and how many of these people return to having normal blood sugar levels. And they found that, yes, it increases the risk. It does. Rather like having a family history does. Well, actually, that significantly increases the risk. Rather like, I don't know, I'm trying to think what else. Having PCOS does, all sorts of things increase the risk. But one does not necessarily mean the other. And that's the issue I have with this particular term. Pre-diabetes implies you are on the step towards developing diabetes. And that's not true. And the reason that's problematic is because, like Joy, who was told the only thing you can do now is lose weight, when people get told they're about to develop diabetes, they will do whatever their doctors tell them to do, right? Makes sense. Doctors telling me to avoid diabetes, I have to do this, that, and the other. So I better do this, that, and the other. Which would be fine if the thing they were recommending wasn't going to make matters worse. So let's consider the cost of this PR stunt for a moment, okay? Because there there is a significant cost to you and I, to the general public. Um, there's cost to the healthcare system every time we do these blood tests, every time we, you know, call you in for a review. That's a cost. It's a cost to individuals, especially if you don't have healthcare that's free at the point of access. But even if you do, I mean, you're paying taxes, right? There's the emotional cost of this. Being told you have pre-diabetes. It's like being told you have, well, someone said pre-cancer once. And again, if I knew that I had a condition that really significantly increased my risk of developing cancer and there was something I could do about it, I'd want to know. But if you told me, look, you have pre-cancer and there's a chance you might develop cancer down the road, so 5%, 10%, doesn't matter, but there's nothing you can do about it, I don't want to know. I'm not interested in finding out because it's not going to change what I do. It's just going to make me anxious about it. And so the emotional cost to the person. If there's a chance I'm going to develop diabetes down the line, I don't actually want to know about it until I do, right? Unless I can do something to prevent it. There is also the social cost. Um, there is the impact of weight stigma. There is all sorts of things. But there's also the amount that's being spent on drug companies that create weight loss drugs, bariatric surgeons for weight loss surgery, diabetes drugs, which are being used sometimes to treat pre-diabetes. All of these people are profiting, right? Who stands to profit? The CDC budget for pre-diabetes has gone up exponentially since 2001. At the same time, their budget for cancer has gone down. People's lives are being impacted by this decision. And who stands to profit? Big pharma, right? Bariatric surgeons, people who are being paid for weight loss, the weight loss industrial complex, if you will. And now let's look for a moment at the American Diabetes Association's corporate sponsors, shall we? Shall I list them for you? Novo Nordisk, Eli Lilly. Novo Nordisk makes Wegovy and Ozempic. Eli Lilly makes Mounjaro. Sanofi, Merck, Abbott, Pfizer. I could go on. Drug company after drug company after drug company. So we know who's losing and we also know who's gaining. And now the question remains, can I prevent diabetes? Because if I can, even if there's only, even if it's a small chance, if I can prevent diabetes, then I want to know about it. And so you have to ask, what is going to really reduce my risk, significantly reduce my risk? And there have been some studies. For example, metformin, which is a drug, has been studied extensively. And of course, they've looked at weight loss as well. And what they found was that there was a slight decrease in progression to diabetes with lifestyle changes and metformin in the first couple of years. And then pretty much no difference. And so you could say, well, what about, what are we talking about? What numbers are we talking about? We're talking about dropping it from, say, 7% chance to a 6% chance of you developing diabetes. Because remember, the chances of you developing diabetes within a year are very low. So instead of 7%, I can drop it down to 6%. It's not like I can drop it down from 80% to 10%. That'd be completely different. Now, some of you might say, all right, 7% to 6%, I'm in. And that's fine. I totally understand that. Some of you might be like, are you freaking kidding me? I'm not putting myself through that just for the sake of a 1% reduction. That is just not going to do it for me. So I'm going to be covering a lot more in detail in my masterclass. I'll be giving you lots more information, statistics and data so that you can make your own informed choice. But I promised you that we were going to have a section called Everything You've Been Told About Weight Loss is a Lie. And so I figured I would pick a study that was important that was related to this particular topic. So what I'm going to do, I should really introduce this section, shouldn't I? Everything you've been told about weight loss is a lie is a section where I'm going to take one paper, which I will link in the show notes, and I will basically discuss that paper over the period of a few minutes. And you can either get your geek on or you can fast forward through this. But I just want to I want to share with you once a week another piece of evidence, another piece in the puzzle that will show you that weight loss is not all it's cracked out to be. And this one is Delahanty et al. Delahanty Pan. Jablotz, you know what? I need to stop trying to pronounce people's names. It's just going to be embarrassing for me. It was published in 2014. It was published in Diabetes Care, the journal Diabetes Care, October the 1st, 2014. It's called Effects of Weight Loss, Weight Cycling and Weight Loss Maintenance on Diabetes Incidence and Change in Cardiometabolic Traits in the Diabetes Prevention Program. Did you get that? That's quite the mouthful. I'll say it again. Effect of weight loss, weight cycling, and weight loss maintenance on diabetes incidence and changes in cardiometabolic traits in the diabetes prevention program. So the diabetes prevention program has had more than 50 studies done on it. This was a group of people who started, oh gosh, I believe it was 1996. I'll probably talk about them again. But it was in the very late 90s into the early 2000s, the original cohort, and they basically separated them into three groups. You either were a placebo group, or you sort of did like diet and exercise, or you took metformin twice a day. And they wanted to see whether these were people who I guess might be considered to have pre-diabetes. Of course, I don't use that term, but impaired fasting glucose. So they were slightly higher risk than just your average population. And then we're like, right, we want to find out if we can prevent diabetes from happening. And so they just follow these people up for a few years. And then eventually they ended up following most of them for over 20 years now. We have 20 years worth of data. So it's quite an interesting cohort. And they've done lots and lots of studies. And in this case, we were looking at weight cycling. So the study found that weight cycling, which was defined as a 5 pound or more weight fluctuation, which isn't much, right? 5 pounds is not that much. I often joke that having a really good poo will drop 2 pounds. So 5 pounds doesn't feel like a massive weight cycle. I normally would define a weight cycle as more than 10 pounds. So this is quite the low threshold. So the study found that weight cycling, 5 pounds weight fluctuations, was associated with an increased risk. I'll say it one more time, an increased risk of developing diabetes. So amongst people with pre-diabetes, this study found, without doubt, using a very large cohort that has been examined or has been studied at least 50 times. Using that cohort, the study found that weight cycling was associated with an increased risk of developing diabetes. And this relationship remains significant even when they adjusted for your baseline weight. So no matter how fat you were to start with or how much weight you lost over 2 years, didn't make a difference. Depending on what model they used, you were either at a 22% higher risk, or when they used a much better model that includes a wider range of factors so it incorporated more variables that made it slightly more accurate, the risk actually increased to 33% more likely. So when they just used a very basic model in order to work out the hazard ratio, and the hazard ratio was 1.22, which indicates a 22% higher risk of diabetes for those who those with weight cycle. And then if they used a more efficient and more reliable model that got rid of that sort of accounted for more variables and therefore left less room for error, then the risk actually increased to 33%. That means you are 33%, that's 1/3, more likely to develop diabetes if you have pre-diabetes and weight cycle. So the fact actually that the hazard ratio for weight cycling increases slightly more in the comprehensive model is because it accounts for additional factors. And so that shows really that what I'm trying to say here, oh dear, I didn't have to explain that very well, but what I'm trying to say here is that weight strong cycling is strongly associated with diabetes risk. And there's no question about it because the more we account for variable factors and the more comprehensive model we use, the higher the risk is. So there is no question that weight cycling is um, is has been shown to increase your risk of diabetes. Now, for those who don't know, um, up to 98% of people who lose weight will regain it within 5 years. Up to two-thirds of people who intentionally lose weight will end up heavier when they first started. Weight cycling is an inevitable part of weight loss. Weight loss is unsustainable. And we know this because study after study after study has shown it. There are studies going back all the way to the 1950s and before that have shown without doubt that weight loss is not sustainable for the vast majority of people, which means statistically speaking, if you attempt to lose weight, you are going to regain it. And if you lose more than 5 pounds and you regain it again, which is pretty inevitable, this study suggests that you are 22% more likely, or 33% more likely, I should say, depending on whether you want to go for the lower estimate or the higher estimate, more likely to develop diabetes. So when your doctor says to you, or when her doctor said to Joy, you need to lose weight to prevent diabetes, he is actually telling her to go and lose weight, which she will inevitably regain, and therefore increase her risk of diabetes. How completely and utterly negligent, I'm trying to think of another word, but negligent is that. Now, you could say, well, maybe this person hasn't read this particular study, and that's reasonable. Maybe they haven't. It came out in 2014. Maybe they didn't read it. You can't read all the studies out there. Maybe they didn't know. But still, that doesn't change the fact that for Joy, by going on a diet, or worse still, going on several diets, as us fatties are wont to do, she's actually increasing her risk of diabetes. And that's not okay. So, everything you've been told about weight loss is a lie. That was my first section. Don't worry, there'll be plenty more. If you've got a question you'd like to ask me, then go ahead and ask me anything you like. I will leave a form at the bottom of the show notes, or you can contact me on social media, or you can email me through my website. Get in touch with me any way you like and just say, hey, Asha, I've got a question for you. And then I'll see if I can answer it. I mean, I'll do my very best anyway. I hope you've enjoyed episode 1. We'll be back next week where we are going to be talking about, oh, I really should have this page up. No, we're going to be talking about health. What does health mean? And why it's important to examine this when we start talking about weight stigma and weight inclusive care. It's part of a series that I'm going to be doing, and you'll hear a lot more then. But in the meantime, take care of yourselves. Don't forget, I've got that Prediabetes Masterclass coming up. You don't have to come to the live event. You might be listening to this 6 months from now, and you'll be thinking, oh crap, I missed it. Not a problem. You can watch it anytime. All my masterclasses are on demand once the live event is over, so you can watch the replay. It's not just the live class either. There's also presentation. There's also a customizable script as well, so you have all the details and all the information that you need to manage your condition in a weight inclusive way, and also to help you to advocate for weight inclusive care from your own healthcare team. So I have this one coming up on pre-diabetes, but I've got lots of other ones, and you can watch them anytime. Again, link in the show notes, link in the comments below. And one last thing, don't forget, if you need to consult with a doctor, a weight inclusive doctor, and you're thinking, help, then you can consult with me. I've just had a client who messaged me and said, I've got an appointment in a couple of days' time, and I'd really like to speak to you beforehand. Can we sort it out? I was like, yes, we can. And we did. So if you want to consult with me, feel free. Looking forward to speaking to you next week. Thanks for joining me for the first episode of season 5. Take care of yourself.